Hello, welcome to Ever Chosen Minis. Today I'm going to show you how I made my unique ballistus dreadnought through kit bashing. Really excited how this turned out. Used model kits that I didn't really expect I would have for this, and you might find it a little hard to find them yourself. But overall, great project, had a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy watching how I did it. Now, I'm not entirely sure where this model came from. I went to a Bits Bazaar here where I live, where people kind of go selling their models that they don't want for store credit. I really like going to these. You find gyms all the time, but particularly this last time, for $10, there was like 5 mechs from this game that I'd never seen, and they were all relatively proportionate to what you would consider your average tabletop scale. Really worked well here. I think the tank was a perfect substitute for 40k size, so that's what we went with on this particular kit bash. But as you can see, this mech has a really unique shape. When we get into the video, you see the close-ups, it'll make a lot more sense. But it gives it a really industrial feel, which whenever I started painting Imperial Fist, seemed to make the perfect match. So as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to pick it up, and overall results are fantastic. I'm really happy that I ended up doing that, and I hope that you guys will use this video kind of as a way to find inspiration on how to do the same. Maybe you'll see a model from another game, maybe not 40k, but maybe you want to incorporate that into some of your models, because I think it adds a little bit of diversity. I used a lot of GW parts on this to kind of help meld it back into that universe, and if you follow that kind of philosophy of combining the game that it's supposed to be for, 50-50 with the new model, I think it'll pass a lot. It has a lot of character and help you set yourself apart on the tabletop. So we're gonna get started on showing you exactly step by step how I did this, from the kit bashing to the painting and even the base that he's sitting on. I'm really proud of it, and yeah, I really hope that y'all enjoy it.
Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at what we're working with here. So this model, as it is really cool, has a really strong industrial feel, but it's missing a few things. Right now, it's missing the two front guns that a ballistic dreadnought has on the torso, as well as a missile launcher in place of the kind of second larger cannon that this particular mech has here. Now, just so that we don't have everything be a completely third-party model, we are going to modify a few more things on this model. Particularly the legs I'm not in love with, so we're going to just swap those out with some Arminger legs. I already had some pre-built from a third-party model that I had gotten previously, so that's something that we can work with here. And then the really tricky part is going to be crafting this missile launcher, because I don't happen to have a spare one from another kit. So we're going to be making that of our own. That one's going to be kind of the biggest and hardest part of this kit bash. So we're going to tackle that first here. Alright, I'm really proud with how the missile launcher ended up turning out. So let me kind of walk you through the process we did and the parts that I'm using here. Now the overall shape of the rocket launcher is pretty boxy, as it should be, and I was lucky enough that I had a spare engine from a Storm Talon gunship. So we need to modify it slightly. Having the engine in the front is just not going to do. So we just are going to flip that around so that that engine part's in the back. We're going to kind of use that as a pseudo exhaust for the missiles coming out. And the front part, we're just not going to attach the engine that's normally jutting out of there. I have the front half of the missile plate on a Titan rocket launcher. So we're just going to cut that in half and kind of shave it down to fit this shape. It's really close already. So once we trim it a little bit, it should fit right in. And then how we kind of seamlessly get this all going together is going to be with green stuff. So I have some liquid green stuff here. It's going to be really good for just filling in those gaps. For me, it took about 2 to 3 layers and passes to make sure that it had a really nice and filled in gap around there. And if it goes over a little bit, that's fine. I just sanded it down to make it flush. So after that, it shouldn't really even be noticeable. And we just want to trim off the fins that kind of come with this, make sure that it's as flat and boxy as possible on this particular piece, and then it's going to feel right at home on the side of this robot. Now, the next part of the kit bash is actually the easiest that I had. All I had to do was a few trims and drill a hole, and we were good to go. So what we're going to be doing now is just applying those two front guns that the ballistus dreadnought has, the bolter rifles, and we're going to kind of go back to the Arbinger kit here in order to get those bits. Now I have built a lot of Arbingers for several projects, so I happen to have a lot of guns from them just kind of hanging around. And the good part is that they actually come with little tabs. They're supposed to just kind of slot in to the top of that model, so it already gives us a connection point. So simply all I did was trim down some of the plastic that was around the areas where I wanted these guns to be. There was just two plastic tabs that I cut off, and so that went by super quick here. And then I just drilled a hole with my drill and simply put a little glue there and just slotted those guns in. And that was it. It really does look good, it has a really solid bond, and that part took no time at all. So really happy with that. And now we can kind of move on to the back piece here. Normally this thing just kind of has like some doors, and because it's a dreadnought, the doors don't really work. You're not supposed to get in and out of this thing. So I found kind of the back cap piece that you normally find on a Titan kit. We are kind of salvaging a lot from those on this particular project. But it does have the Imperial skull and cogwheel on the back, so really just kind of further ties everything in. So I did trim a few of the bolts around on the back so that it would actually have some room to fit, and then we just glued that into place. Now there is kind of an unsightly gap that this makes, so liquid green stuff won't really cover it on this particular part, so we're going to just go with normal green stuff so that we can get that applied. So here we're just going to go around the edges. I have my sculpting tool here. We're just going to press that in, try to get that as flat as possible around, and just kind of try to meld the two together. It shouldn't really be too much. This is a really easy process. If you're scared of green stuff, I promise it's worth it to use. You can just use these simple applications for it, and it's really going to help you out with a lot of your projects. All right, next we're going to tackle kind of a minor detail. The gun on the right side that we kind of took off earlier, that didn't really have a lot going on the side. It's very flat. So really just a simple modification. We're just adding one pipe there just to give it slightly more visual interest. And it's just going to help give it a little bit more dimensionality. So we're just going to trim this pipe off, the little smaller one that doesn't quite work with it. And then we're simply just going to glue both ends on. And just as interesting places on the side so that we can add a little bit more to it. So super easy, super quick, and then we can move on to actually attaching the legs and the torso. Now to join the top and bottom part of this model together, we're going to be using a cut kind of cylinder that I did earlier, and we're going to put this in with a lot of green stuff on the top and bottom of that cylinder so that it all kind of squishes together and it fills that in. Now, the bottom part of the legs also has a little hole in the back, so we're using some green stuff to cover that back part up as well. And then we're just simply going to use our tools and the liquid green stuff to kind of smooth everything out. We want it to be as cylindrical as possible. Most machined cylinders don't have a lot of wobble and natural looking textures, so we just want to smooth that out as much as we can while making sure that it dries with a really solid bond, since this is going to be the biggest point of failure. So we want that to be nice and strong, and then we'll just need to leave this overnight to dry and cure so that it's good enough so that we can get this painted. Now, before we call this model done, one thing that will tie pretty much anything into 40K is going to be purity seals. We're going to cut a few of these off and just place them on some interesting parts of the model. We're going to want to do this on the main body and the sides, just everywhere that we can that adds a little more visual interest. And putting these on the parts that didn't actually come from Games Workshop will really kind of sell the effect that they may have been printed directly from them. So we're just going to use this to tie everything together. It's a nice final touch. I think it looked really great on vehicles, and you just have a few scattered around. And this will be the last thing that we do to the model before moving on to the base. Now, the base is its own kind of interesting project. I had an idea in mind that this dreadnought would kind of be peeking over a wall and firing over some ruins. So that's kind of what we're accomplishing here. So we kind of start off with just a nice cork floor. We're going to use all cork as concrete for this base. And so what we're going to be doing is kind of making some structures with it. So we get the concrete slab at the bottom. I have put a few pieces of cut wire through it, and they're just sticking out so that we can do a wall. This is going to add some structure to it, so that it doesn't just topple over if it happens to get laid on its side or anything like that. It's going to keep it nice and sturdy. So we're just going to stab this into the wall piece that we broke off. Really just the corner of the core cord was used here so that we get that truly flat edge. Makes it really easy to do. And then we're just going to be adding more and more interest. I found this piece from a piece of GW terrain. This is going to kind of act as a buttress to the side. We also have some vents here that we can glue on. I have some resin kind of gas canisters and stuff. We're just going to make rubble. We can use beat up cork, little rocks is what I'm using here. And you just want to arrange this in a way that maybe seems like this was a storeroom that got blown up. So we have stuff kind of everywhere, rubble. And then once all of that is in place and dry, you want to get the bigger rocks out of the way so that everything around it can kind of help blend it into the environment. So here for the concrete, if you haven't kind of made your own before, having like a rough texture paste spread super, super thin is going to be my method for making sure that this actually looks like concrete. It's going to give it that kind of layer on top that you would see on normal concrete. And this is just going to be something we put everywhere. This step does take a little while, but you got to be patient. If you put it on too thick, it's not going to look like concrete. It does need to be super thin. So what I'm using here, I just put a little bit on, and then I would just scrape it, just kind of getting that all over the model evenly. And then the next part that's going to tie it in and start making it look more natural and blend those pieces into the environment is going to be a little bit of dirt and gravel. So for this, we're just going to use some PVA glue, put it around the edges of everything and into the corners, and then we can just sprinkle that in there. So that's just going to give us a nice blended effect. And to kind of wrap that up, what we want to do is use some watered down PVA. I have a little squirt bottle here, and I just put that over everything. That's going to seal everything together. It does take a while to dry with how wet it is, but I promise it's worth it. This thing will never come apart. Even if you drop it, you're not going to like lose flecks here and there. So we're doing this step to seal it in. And so you'll leave this with the model to dry with the green stuff, and you'll be ready the next day to prime and paint it. And that's what we're going to get into next. Alright, before we get to the main event, I'm just going to go ahead and show you how I knocked out this base. This part was really quick. It doesn't take too long to color these bases the way I do it, specifically with the city rubble. We're just going to start with a gray dry brush, followed by a lighter gray. So we're just going to give it one highlight here, and we're going to add more depth with some of the other steps we're going to do. And then we just want to pick out some of the details. So we're going to pick out the metallics. I made the ammo box here green, gas tanks red, just to give them a little bit more pop. And we just want to give everything just one highlight is all that's needed. We don't really need to do too much more. This is going to be covered a lot by the model that's going to be sitting in front of it, so we don't want to spend too much time here. And then we want to break out the weathering pigments. Now, this is where I pretty much go ham. Uh, all of my bases have weathering pigments. I think it is a super kind of skill cheat that can be used to take your bases to the next level. Mine are from Vallejo. I got mine as a 4-pack, and it just comes with 4 various weather pigments. Mine's is more of a deserty tan theme, but does have a dark red as you see here. So it's really good just to kind of water these down, paint them everywhere. By the time they dry, they are going to look very dry, but they're not going to come off or anything, so you don't need to varnish it or anything like that. And then if you apply too much, like what I might have done here, what you can do is water your brush down and thin it a little bit, maybe move it around more, or just kind of wick it into the brush and clean it up. Another idea is to just dry brush it with a gray again with your highlight color. That's going to cover it up as opposed to wicking it off. You just want to make sure that it's dry before you do that so that you're not getting the pigment into the paint and then you just get kind of a mess that you end up highlighting everything with. So just be careful with that. This is a super easy tool to use. I really like them. And then once we're done here, we're just going to rim it black and that will be done. All right, moving on to the main event. What we've done here is primed it completely white. We didn't bother with a zenithal or anything like that. We want everything to be super bright, super vibrant. I like to start all of my kind of grim dark and really weathered down projects as bright as possible because that's going to contrast the most against a lot of the weathering that we want to do. It's going to make it stick out like a sore thumb, which is actually really what we want right now. So this step is going to be super easy. We are really just going to be utilizing contrast paints as our base. It's the fastest and honestly probably one of the best ways to get some dimensionality and just your colors down really fast. So for the kind of metal bits and dark bits that we want, we're going to just use Rattling Grime. This is going to be kind of like a dark, dirty gray is the best way I can describe it. And it's a really good base coat for metallics because you can dry brush on top of it and it's going to make it look completely metallic. We kind of trick the eye into thinking it's just been completely painted with metallics. Now, we are going to be utilizing Imperial Fist Yellow for the rest of it. Really just the best contrast paint I've ever used. It has a really high pigment density, so it covers super well. You don't need to go over it 2 to 3 times to get a good yellow like some just traditional yellow paints out of the pot would. So this is going to save us quite a bit of time and really let us focus on the weathering and just some minor highlights. So we're just going to knock this out really quick step, and then we are going to move on to some more details. All right, now we just want to knock out the metallic. I've just kind of base coated everything here in a gunmetal, really common paint. Almost everyone should have it. The brand doesn't super matter, so if you like a different shade or a different metallic, you can definitely substitute that here for your own miniatures. And we're just going to be dry brushing the legs that we already went ahead and based with Rattling Grime. It's just kind of going to fool us into thinking that the whole thing is metallic. So just dry brush the tops. You can kind of leave the recesses, so that part will go really quick. Some of the parts that we didn't base coat that we want all metallic, like the gun barrel, front guns, and some of the pipes on the front, we just want to do a good job of basing those all the way. If you spin them all around and you miss a point, metallics are one of the easiest things to kind of spot that on, especially when we darken it down, we add more contrast to those areas. So just take your time, be neat with these smaller details, and then we can go ahead and move on. Now, the last part is probably the most tedious because with yellow and us having kind of some darker accents like black, like red, it's really important that we are neat and that we don't kind of stray from our outline. So this part really took me a while just to make sure that everything didn't spill over, and if it did, that I could clean it up. And we're just going to be getting everything ready with these base coats. So around the edges of like the rocket launcher, we're going to be just doing a solid black. We're just going to be contrasting the red that's going to be most of everywhere else on the detailing. So like the rockets, the purity seals, the cog and skull on the back, and then the trims on the Arbinger legs here. We want all that to be red. Really easy to do. We're really just base coating it, and then we want to just do a very simple highlight on it. You can highlight it more if you prefer for your own models. I'm just doing the one here. I don't usually go too far with the highlights on these things, especially since the yellow is going to be kind of hard to out highlight with a lot of these anyway. So once we do that, we're neat. We can do the tan on the purity seals and just make sure that everything gets taken care of there. All right, now moving on to the step that's going to add a ton of detail to this and kind of make it sing are the decals. I don't know about you, for vehicles, I always find it so easy with these big flat panels. Infantry, I kind of hate doing. Space Marine shoulder pads are the worst to get decals on, but here it's actually quite a pleasure. So we're just going to find some big kind of flat open panels that are going to house these decals really well. This front shield is what I was most excited for. We got two decals on here and it really makes them stand out. Again, adding as much heraldry and stuff onto this third party model from GW is just going to tie it more and more in universe and make it almost indistinguishable. If you didn't play a lot of 40k, you saw this, you might even think that it's a real model at this point. So we just want to hit this front part with the decals, the rocket launcher, just anywhere that has a nice flat spot that we want to add some more visual interest is where we're going to put these. Now, the easiest way I found to do it on vehicles, since you don't really need to smooth out the surface with a gloss varnish, just make sure that they are completely flat when you lay them down. You get the moisture out. And then I do about 2 to 3 coats of a matte varnish over it. And you don't want to do just around the detail. I try to do to the kind of panel that it's on. So, for example, this front part has like a little square. Try to cover that whole square so that it just all remains flush with that spot. And this is going to help hide the edges of the decal as well. and help it blend in the model, make it look painted on as opposed to it just being like a sticker. So if you do that, it's going to hide the edges, bring it in line. The matte finish blends in with all the paint that we've been doing so far. And if it sticks out just a little bit, that's fine. This next step, we're going to be heavily weathering the model, and that's going to knock everything down and uniform it. It's also going to make some chips in the decal, which will further enhance the effect that it's actually painted on and not just something we stuck there. So moving on here, we're going to be showing you how I did the weathering, and that'll be the final step. Now, for weathering on these vehicles, the best thing that I know how to do is actually with a sponge. The sponge is a really simple tool that gives you a lot of variety with the way that the pattern ends up coming on. So we're going to start with the black. We want to hit mostly the corners. You definitely want to hit some specks in the middle, but what's going to sell it is those worn edges, I feel. They look the best, and you want to add kind of some variety in how much you're doing. So some edges might just have like a little dab here and there, and others you want to make like a really big black spot in the corner or along the edge and really start expanding this. With a combination of the silver that we want to dry brush on here in a second, it's going to add a lot of depth and it's going to really add that war-torn look to the model. So from here, we're going to repeat this step with silver. I'm using the same gunmetal gray as before, but you could use a different silver, a brighter silver, depending on how vibrant you want these chips to be. And you want to aim it in two places. So you want the edges again, but those bigger black spots that we made before are what we want to center this around. What this is going to do is trick you into thinking that not only have we chipped the paint, but now we've also chipped what would be primer on these things. So we've gotten all the way to the metal body underneath, and doing this is going to sell that weathering. So we just do this all across the model. You want to take your time with this. It is a quick step, so it's not really going to take you too much, but you do want to aim for interesting edges. You don't want to leave one part super beat up and then maybe miss a spot where like maybe one of these panels on the bottom has zero weathering. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. It really is noticeable if you forget to hit it. If you do, no big deal. You always go back and do it, but just be wary whenever you're trying to do this kind of weathering to just make sure to hit every edge. It'll go by quicker than you think. And then to finish everything off, I am a huge believer in oil paint. I think for vehicles specifically as well, especially with these flat panels, the ability to wipe off the flat parts when you're done is invaluable. Here we kind of just dunk everything. We're dunking everything in a mix of burnt sienna and burnt umber. These two oil paints specifically will carry you through pretty much everything. I use the Winton ones. They are kind of expensive if you haven't actually gotten into oil yet. Highly recommend it. But with it being expensive, these tubes, since you don't need very much to make these mixtures, will last you a lifetime. I have had this for 3 years, and I doubt that I've used 1/100th of the tube. So really worthwhile for investment. You just thin it down with some mineral spirits, and you get this amazing wash. It's just going to run itself into all the recesses, and it's going to instantly shade everything. Now, as we're working on this, just that oil for me is not enough. So what you can do is go back in and you can take, without it being thin, some of the oil and just put those directly into the recesses. Sometimes it'll kind of glob on. I also do it on some bolts as well. And once we glob that on, it's not going to look super great unless you want it to be that thick. It'll look a little corroded even if you put a lot on there. So you can use that to some interesting effect as well. But what we want to do is just come back in with a little bit of mineral spirits in our brush. And we're going to move it around. We can go down and make grime streaks from some of the bolts. Anything that has kind of spilled over onto the armor panel, but you want it more in the recess, you could manipulate and push around wherever you want. This is a super flexible medium. I really like it a lot. And the best part is once we're done, you want to give it about maybe 15 minutes to dry or so. But you'll come back in with some mineral spirits on a makeup brush or a sponge, just something kind of flat, like what I'm using here. And we can wipe off these armor panels. This is going to take kind of the tinted, kind of brown off of the yellow in certain areas where we want it to really shine. So for me, this is like the top of the mech, top of the missile pod, and now we have our highlights again. So not only has the step given us perfect weathering, it's also darkened down the yellow a little bit, give it more of a gradient. And once you're done, the model is going to need a little bit of time to sit. You don't really want to handle oil paints really the day that you use it, preferably. So you just want to give it a little bit of time, and then that way you can handle them. They should be well enough to handle a little bit in 24 hours. I'd probably wait a few days before playing them on the tabletop because they do dry completely. They just take a while. Or you can throw on a matte varnish if you want to play with them a little bit more immediately after 24 hours would be my recommendation. But that is how you get this kind of weathering. It will make your models look very handsome. Alright, and that brings us to the end of the video. I had a ton of fun making this model. I think it works super well, and I was able to achieve my vision of bringing in a model that's not from Games Workshop and making it look right at home alongside the rest of my Imperial Fist forces. Now, if you like the content, you like this video, feel free to like it, and then you can also subscribe to the channel if you'd like. I really like kit bashing. We're going to be doing a lot more of it on this channel, and I can also show you more painting techniques as we do different types of projects. If you want to see anything in particular, if you have an idea that maybe you don't think that you can do or that you want to see someone else try first, feel free to comment that. Really open to feedback. This channel is super new, and so I just want to make sure I grow toward an audience that will appreciate and just tell me what you want to see. I'm here for it. I thank you so much here for watching. Have a great rest of your day.